The billboards start somewhere around Sullivan. That's my way of saying we didn't just stumble on the place. Meramec Caverns has been putting signs on I-44 since before I was born. These big yellow things with the cave mouth painted on them and world famous written across the top, like that settles the argument. By the time we hit the Stanton exit, Oscar had counted 11 of them and was reading each one out loud like I hadn't seen it too. I didn't mind. It was a long drive and he'd been quiet for most of it, which with Oscar usually means something is bothering him. So the billboard commentary was actually a relief. We'd left St. Louis that morning with no particular plan except to get out of the apartment for a day. That was the whole thing. Our mom had been gone 3 weeks by then. Not dead, just gone, which is its own kind of problem. And the apartment had started to feel like a waiting room for something that wasn't coming. Oscar was 16 and spending his summer on the couch, and I was 22 and supposed to be figuring out what to do about that. A cave seemed manageable. 40 miles of billboards made it feel almost mandatory. The parking lot was gravel, which I don't remember from when I was a kid. Maybe it was always gravel. The gift shop sat at the front of everything, a low building with a green metal roof and a hand-lettered sign in the window that said, "Tickets sold here," like you might otherwise wander past it. Oscar got out of the car and immediately looked at the cave entrance, which you could see from the lot. This big limestone arch set into the hillside, dark inside, a wooden sign overhead with a name on it. He had his phone out before I'd even locked the car. Inside the gift shop, it was cool and a little dim, and it smelled like every gift shop I've ever been in, which is a combination of dust and whatever they spray on novelty items before they ship them. The postcard racks were right by the door, same as I remembered, and the Jesse James stuff was in a glass case near the register. Coins, little plaques, a folded reproduction of some wanted poster. Jesse James had supposedly used the cave to hide out. That's the story they sell. I don't know if it's true and it doesn't really matter. The woman behind the counter was maybe late 40s, heavy set, short hair going gray at the roots, glasses with thin wire frames. Her name badge said Jade. She was already looking at us when we came in, or looking at the space we walked into. It's hard to say which. She had the practiced stillness of somebody who's been behind that counter long enough that the customers have stopped being individuals. I told her 2 tickets. She pulled them from somewhere below the counter and set them down, then reached under again and came up with 2 audio wands, which are these chunky plastic things shaped like a TV remote, and she slid them both across the glass toward me. "Keep the wand pointed at the number posts," she said. "You'll hear the narration." I nodded and picked them up. She didn't move to take my card or say anything else for a second. Then she said, "Don't let him touch the formations." She was looking at Oscar when she said it. Oscar was over by the postcard rack, not paying attention to either of us. I said something like, "Sure, of course, the way you do." I figured it was the speech she gave every group that came in with a teenager. Probably carved into her routine by now. 2 tickets, 2 wands, don't touch the formations. I took the receipt she printed and folded it into my back pocket without looking at it. The thing is, she hadn't said, "Don't let anyone touch the formations." She'd said, "Don't let him touch them." I noticed that. I noticed it the way you notice a light flicker. Registered it, filed it under nothing, kept moving. That's the honest version. We went back outside into the heat. The parking lot smelled like baked gravel and car exhaust, and underneath that, faintly, something cool and wet that was coming from the direction of the cave entrance. Oscar was standing near the mouth of the arch, not inside it, just close. And he had his phone up. "Come look at this," he said. I walked over. He turned the phone to show me the photo he'd just taken. The arch, the sign overhead, the dark opening of the cave behind it. And just inside that dark, maybe 10 feet in, there was a figure. Person in a Park Service uniform, tan shirt, standing still, facing out toward the parking lot. facing toward us, I guess, though you couldn't make out a face in the photo, just the shape of someone standing there. I looked at it for a second. Then I looked up at the actual entrance, but whoever it was had moved, or I was looking at the wrong angle. There was just the dark. "Staff," I said, probably doing a head count, tracking who goes in. Oscar looked at the photo again, then at the entrance. "He's just standing there." "That's the job," I said, which isn't really an explanation, but Oscar didn't push it. I handed him one of the audio wands and kept the other. He took it and turned it over in his hands, already looking bored by it. I was already moving toward the entrance. I've thought about that photo a lot since then. The way the figure was standing, not moving, not doing anything that looked like a head count or a monitoring sweep. Just standing there facing out. And I looked at it, and I had a thought that didn't quite finish itself, something like, "That's a strange place to stand," or "Why is he looking this way?" And then I handed Oscar the audio wand and walked us both inside. And the thought dissolved the way half-formed thoughts do when you're already moving on to the next thing. The cave entrance was cooler than I expected. Not cold, not yet, but the air changed immediately. Damp and mineral, with a weight to it that outdoor air doesn't have. The limestone walls were close on both sides of the path, and the ceiling rose up ahead of us into the first chamber, and the electric lights along the walkway gave everything this amber tint that made it feel older than it was. Oscar fell into step behind me. His phone was still in his hand. The audio wand wasn't on yet. Whatever Jade had said was already somewhere in the back of my head. Not gone exactly, but not present either. The photo was already on Oscar's camera roll. We were already inside. I didn't know yet what that meant. I do now. The first chamber was everything the billboards had promised, and nothing more than that. Stalactites hanging from the ceiling in rows. The audio wand telling me each one had taken roughly a cubic inch every 100 years to form, and I remember thinking that's either impressive or depressing, depending on how you look at it. The lights along the walkway were that same amber color from the entrance, warm and slightly artificial. The kind of lighting that makes everything look like it's been preserved in something. The path was paved, smooth underfoot, wide enough for two people side by side. There were rope barriers along the edges keeping you off the formations. Signs every 20 feet or so, laminated, explaining what you were looking at. Oscar had already stopped listening to the audio wand. I could tell because he'd let it drop to his side, not off, just hanging there in his hand while he looked around with that particular expression teenagers get when they've decided something is less interesting than they hoped. Not bored enough to complain, just bored enough that you could see it on his face if you were paying attention. I was paying attention for what it's worth, not that it helped. The wand flagged something about calcite deposits, and I paused to hear the rest of it. Oscar kept walking. That was the pattern we fell into almost immediately. Me stopping, him moving, the gap between us stretching and then closing and then stretching again. The cave had a way of pulling sound in different directions. I could hear the wand narrating, but I couldn't always hear Oscar's footsteps. And I told myself that was fine because the path was a single loop. One way in, one way out. Nowhere to actually go. The second chamber was bigger. The ceiling went up higher than the lights could really reach, and there was a moment walking into it where you felt the space open around you before you could see it. Just this shift in the air pressure. The sound changing. The audio wand called it the cathedral room, which I thought was a little much, but I understood the impulse. It was the kind of space that made you lower your voice without deciding to. There was a column formation on the east wall, floor to ceiling, wide as a truck, pale gray-white with the surface texture of something that had been dripped into shape over a very long time. The wand had something to say about it. I stopped to hear it out. Oscar was already past it. That's the part I've turned over a lot since then. Not that he was ahead of me. He'd been ahead of me the whole time. But that I had stopped, specifically right there, with the wand talking about geological timescales. And I had given him those extra 30 seconds of distance. 20 seconds. However long it takes to describe how a column forms. Long enough. By the time I looked up, he was at the rope barrier on the east side, the one running along the base of the column, and his hand was already flat against the limestone, not reaching for it, not in the process of touching it, already there. Palm down, fingers spread, pressed against the surface the way you press your hand against a wall to steady yourself. Except he wasn't unsteady. He was just standing there with his hand on the rock. I said his name. He pulled his hand back immediately and turned around, and there was nothing on his face except the mild guilt of someone who'd been caught doing something minor. Not scared, not strange, just caught. His right palm had a gray smear across it, uniform, dry, covering the whole palm from the base of his fingers to the heel of his hand. I looked at the formation. The limestone was clean, no gray on it, no dust, no residue of any kind. Whatever was on his hand had not come from the rock. That's what I should have said out loud. I should have said, "Where did that come from?" and made him show me his hand properly, and looked at it for more than 2 seconds. That's what I should have done. What I actually said was, "Keep your hands to yourself." And Oscar said, "Yeah, okay," and rubbed his palm against his jeans. I watched him do it. The smear didn't transfer to the denim. It didn't spread or smear further. It just stayed on his palm, slightly reduced, still uniform, still dry. I noticed that. I filed it somewhere in the back of my head under weird, and then I kept walking. That's my way of saying I chose not to look at it too hard. I knew it was strange. The part of my brain that was paying attention knew immediately that gray ash on a palm, with nothing on the formation to account for it, was not a normal thing. But there's this other part. The part that's been managing a 16-year-old all summer, that's been making 40 small decisions a day about what's worth a confrontation and what isn't. That part just said kid touched something he wasn't supposed to touch. You corrected him. Move on. And I listened to that part because it was easier, and because the cave was pleasant, and because I had no framework yet for what I was actually standing inside. Oscar fell back into step beside me, which he hadn't done since the entrance. He didn't say anything. I didn't ask him how his hand felt, or whether the smear was still there, or whether the formation had felt cold or warm, or like anything at all. I just walked and let the audio wand pick up wherever it had left off. Something about the river system below us, the underground water table. How the whole cave was still technically being carved out by water moving through it right now, just slowly, just at a pace you couldn't see. Millions of years, the wand said. Give or take. Oscar was quiet beside me. His right hand was down at his side. I didn't look at it again. I should have looked at it again. The lights didn't go out. That's the thing I keep coming back to when I try to explain it to people. They didn't go out. They just changed, shifted down into this brownish yellow that made the limestone look like old teeth, and the shadows that had been sitting quietly in the corners of the chamber suddenly felt like they were leaning in. Not darker exactly, just wrong. The way a room looks wrong when you come back to it after something bad happened there, except nothing had happened yet, or nothing I understood yet. And my brain was still running on the assumption that we were on a cave tour, and the worst thing that had happened so far was Oscar touching a wall. Oscar said, "Did the power go out?" "No," I said, because the lights were still on. I just didn't have a better answer than that. The audio wand switched tracks on its own. I hadn't touched it. My thumb wasn't near the controls. I'd been holding it loose at my side the way you carry something you've forgotten you're carrying, and it just switched, mid-sentence about the water table, cut off the geology narration and went quiet for a half-second, and then a man's voice came through the speaker. Not the same voice as before. The cave tour voice had been a woman, professionally warm, the kind of voice they hire specifically because it makes everything sound educational and safe. This was a man's voice, flat and unhurried, and it was reading names, not dates, not geological periods, names. I stood there and listened to maybe 4 or 5 of them before I understood that's what I was hearing. The first one I caught clearly was Margaret Hollis, then something I didn't catch, then Dale Pruitt, then Connie something. The last name swallowed by the cave's acoustics. Just names one after another with the same pause between each one, the same flat tone, no inflection to suggest the list was going to end. I pressed stop. The names continued. I held the button down, the way you do when a device isn't responding, and you think more pressure is going to change that, which it never does, but you do it anyway. I counted to maybe 5 in my head. The names continued right through it. Thomas Garza, Ruth Ann somebody. Another name I didn't catch. I turned the wand over in my hand, looking for a battery compartment, some way to cut power to the thing directly, because the buttons weren't doing anything, and my understanding of the situation was starting to develop a crack in it. The battery compartment had a small Phillips head screw holding it shut, which I did not have a screwdriver for, which felt like the most absurd specific detail of that moment. That I was standing in a cave listening to a device read names at me, and the thing standing between me and stopping it was a hardware screw I couldn't open with my thumbnail. I tried the power button. Off, I thought at it. Just off. Helen Marsh, the wand said. Carl Denton. Oscar had come back to stand beside me. He was watching the wand like it might do something different if we both watched it. He didn't look scared, which I remember noticing. He looked curious, which was almost worse. Is it broken? He said. Yeah, I said. It's broken. That's what I said. I said it like it was a reasonable explanation for what was happening, because I needed it to be one, and I was still in the part of the experience where I could make that work if I didn't push on it too hard. Broken. Moisture damage, maybe. Some kind of loop in the audio file. There are explanations for electronics doing strange things. I know that. I was reaching for one. The service corridor was set into the east wall, and I hadn't noticed it before because it was built to be unobtrusive. A door-shaped seam in the limestone. No handle visible from where the path ran. The kind of thing that reads as structural until someone opens it from the other side. Austin opened it from the other side. He came through the opening and let the door settle behind him without looking back at it. And he walked toward us at the pace of someone who'd been expecting to find exactly what he found. Park uniform, the tan and green I'd been seeing on staff all afternoon. Name tag on the left chest, Austin Santos. He was broad through the shoulders, heavy-set, gray hair cut close. The kind of man who looks like he's been working outdoors for 30 years, which is a type I recognize, which is probably part of why I didn't look at him harder right away. Gentlemen, he said, not loud, just enough to carry. He looked at the audio wand in my hand and he nodded like he'd already known about it. Equipment gets like that near river level, he said. Moisture works into the hardware over time. We've been having issues with that whole batch of units. He said it the way you say something you've said before, the explanation already worn smooth. I'm sorry about that. That's on us. I looked down at the wand. Sylvia Crane, it said. It's still going, I said. It'll run down, Austin said. Sometimes they loop for a while before they cut out. Best thing is to just set it aside. He said it like he was telling me to put down a cup of coffee I'd finished. Casual, completely casual. And here's the thing. Here's the thing I've had to sit with since. The explanation was reasonable. Moisture and electronics is a real problem. It's not made up. Caves are humid environments, and audio equipment fails in humid environments. The explanation fit the facts I had in front of me, which was a malfunctioning device in a cave. And the man giving me the explanation was wearing a uniform with a name tag and had come out of what was obviously a service corridor, which is exactly where a staff member would come from if they'd been monitoring the chambers and noticed a problem. Every piece of it fit. I wanted it to fit, sure, but it also actually fit. And I don't know how much of what I decided in the next 30 seconds was rationalization And how much was just a reasonable person accepting a reasonable explanation from a person who appeared to have authority over the situation? Both, probably. That's my honest answer. Both. "We can get you a refund on the audio wand rental," Austin said. "Or I can guide you through the rest of the chambers personally, if you'd like. Easier than trying to navigate with a unit that's giving you trouble." I looked at Oscar. Oscar shrugged, which meant he didn't care either way, which meant the decision was mine. The alternative was navigating the remaining chambers with a broken wand and a map printed on the back of a brochure that I hadn't looked at closely enough to trust. The cave was bigger than I'd remembered. I didn't have a clear sense of the layout past the second chamber, and the path had already branched twice. A guide who knew the space was genuinely useful. That part wasn't nothing. "Yeah," I said. "That works. Thanks." Austin nodded once and gestured toward the passage ahead, the same easy professional manner, and I set the wand on the flat top of a nearby barrier post the way he'd suggested, and I followed him, and Oscar fell in beside me, and the names coming from the wand behind us thinned out and faded as we moved deeper into the cave, and by the time we reached the threshold of the third chamber, I couldn't hear them anymore. I told myself it had run down, the way Austin said it would. I didn't look back to check. The third chamber opened up wider than the second, the ceiling pulling back another 20 feet or so, and the path curved left around a formation that looked like a frozen waterfall, all ridged and pale. Austin was a few steps ahead of me, moving at that same unhurried pace he'd had since the service corridor, and I was watching where I put my feet, because the paved walkway had a slight lip on one side that I'd already caught my sneaker on once. Oscar was ahead of Austin. He drifted forward the way he always did, the way he'd been doing since the first chamber, that slow gravitational pull toward whatever was around the next corner. 16-year-olds don't walk with groups, they walk ahead of them. I'd stopped fighting it somewhere around the first chamber and just kept tabs on the back of his head. Then the path bent, and the back of his head wasn't there anymore. I didn't panic right away. The bend was tight, and the formation blocked the sight line, so it wasn't like he'd vanished. He'd just gone around something I hadn't rounded yet. I picked up my pace a little, not running, just closing the gap. Austin was still moving ahead of me at the same speed, which I registered somewhere in the back of my head as a thing that should have bothered me more than it did. If a kid in your tour group disappears around a corner, you move faster. That's the natural response. Austin didn't adjust at all. I came around the bend and stopped. Austin was on the ground, not collapsed, not fallen, sitting. Both palms flat on the paved walkway, fingers spread the way you'd press your hands against something to feel it better. His back was straight. His head was tipped back, eyes open, fixed on the ceiling above him. The ceiling was just limestone up there, same as everywhere else, rough and pale and unremarkable. But he was looking at it with the kind of attention you'd give something that was moving. My first thought was medical. Seizure, maybe, or some kind of episode. That's the frame your brain reaches for when it wants to stay in familiar territory. Person on the ground. Person needs help. Simple. I crouched down next to him and put my hand on his shoulder. The shoulder was solid under my palm, the fabric of the uniform slightly cool from the cave air. I shook him. Not hard. The kind of shake you'd give someone you were trying to wake up without startling them. "Hey," I said. "You okay?" Austin's head turned toward me. That's not quite right. That's the version my brain kept trying to give it afterward because the other version didn't fit anywhere. His head rotated. That's the better word. It came around smooth and continuous, past the point where I expected it to stop. Past the point where a neck stops, and it kept going, and there was no sound from it, no resistance. Nothing that suggested any of the usual machinery was involved. It moved the way something moves when the thing that usually limits its movement isn't there anymore. I felt the shoulder under my hand the whole time. The body didn't move, just the head. rotating on it, until Austin's face was pointed at me from an angle that his body wasn't facing. I didn't let go of the shoulder right away. That's the part I find hard to explain. I should have pulled back, should have stood up, should have done something that matched the scale of what I was looking at. Instead, I just held on for another second or two, my hand on his shoulder, my brain doing something that wasn't quite thinking yet. More like buffering, the way a computer hangs when you've asked it to do something it doesn't have the capacity for. His eyes were the same as they'd been when he was looking at the ceiling. Open, steady, not focused on me exactly, but pointed in my direction, which wasn't the same thing. "You brought a new one," Austin said. His voice was the same voice he'd used to explain moisture damage to audio equipment, conversational, mild. The tone of a man making an observation he finds mildly pleasant. "That's good. We've been getting thin." That was all. He said it, and then he was quiet, his head still rotated past the natural range, his palms still flat on the walkway, his eyes still not quite finding me. I don't know what thin meant. I've thought about it since, and I still don't have a clean answer. Whether he meant thin in numbers, thin in something else. I don't know. I didn't ask. Asking would have required staying, and staying was not a thing I was capable of. I stood up. I'm not sure I made a decision to stand. My legs just did it. The way your hand pulls back from something hot before your brain has finished processing the temperature. There was nothing to say back to him. I understood that clearly. Whatever had just been communicated to me had been communicated completely, and there was no version of a response that would have made any difference to anything. The only object in the third chamber that held any useful information was the direction Oscar had gone, and beyond that, the direction of the entrance, and those two directions were not the same direction, and I was going to have to figure out which one mattered more in the next few seconds. Oscar first. That was the only answer. Oscar was 16, and he'd gone around a bend, and I didn't know what was around the bend, and Austin was on the ground behind me with his head at an angle that heads don't go. I ran. Not fast enough to fall, but fast enough that my sneakers were loud on the paved walkway, and the sound bounced off the limestone in a way that felt wrong. Too much echo, the cave throwing the noise back at me from directions that didn't match. The formation with the frozen waterfall ridges went past on my left. The path straightened. The ceiling dropped a little, and the walls came in, and I kept moving, not looking back, not checking whether Austin had stood up or whether his head had corrected itself or whether anything behind me had changed. I already knew it didn't matter what was behind me. What mattered was what was ahead. The stage curtain room is the one they name on the brochure. I remembered that from when I was a kid. The way the cave wall there has these long vertical ridges running floor to ceiling, pale orange and cream. The mineral deposits stacked up over so many years they start to look like fabric hanging in folds, like a theater curtain that's been there since before the theater existed. I'd thought it was impressive the first time I saw it. I wasn't thinking about that now. I came around the last turn before the chamber opened up, and I saw Oscar. He was standing in the center of the paved walkway, facing the far wall, completely still. Not the stillness of someone looking at something. Not the stillness of someone who'd stopped to read a placard or check his phone. The wrong kind of still. The kind where you can tell from 20 feet away that the person isn't deciding anything, isn't waiting for anything, isn't doing anything at all in the way people normally do nothing. He was just there, upright, facing the limestone. I said his name. He didn't move. I crossed the chamber fast and got my hand around his upper arm and turned him. He came around without resistance, which was its own kind of wrong. 16-year-old boys don't pivot like that. They push back, they say what, in that flat, irritated tone. They at minimum register that someone has touched them. Oscar just rotated to face me, and his face was empty in a way I don't have a clean word for. Not unconscious. His eyes were open. He was standing on his own. But whatever recognition usually lives in a person's face when they see someone they know, that was gone. He looked at me the way you look at a wall. My eyes went to his arm because I already knew, I think. Some part of me had already run the calculation before I consciously started it. The gray smear that had been on his palm in the second chamber, the one I'd told myself was nothing, was just residue from touching something he shouldn't have touched. It had moved. That's the only word for it. It had moved up his hand and across his wrist and up his forearm to the elbow. The same uniform dry gray, the same texture I'd noticed before, the kind that looks like ash from a fire that burned out a long time ago. His skin under it was still his skin, but the gray sat on top of it like it belonged there, like it had always been working its way up and just needed time. I put my other hand on his face, turned it toward me, looked at his eyes. The pupils were the same size. He was breathing. He wasn't cold. I was running through everything I knew about what happens to people when something goes wrong, which isn't much. I'm not a medic. I don't have any training for this. And I kept arriving at the same answer, which was that none of what I knew applied here. Then Oscar opened his mouth. He said a name. One name clearly, in that flat, unhurried tone. The exact same tone the audio wand had used when it read the list of names in the second chamber, before Austin showed up and explained it away as a moisture malfunction. No inflection, no question in it. No recognition of who he was saying it to or why. Just the name, sitting in the air of the stage curtain room like it had been placed there. My grandmother's name. I'm not going to write it down. That's my way of saying it's not something I want to put in a sentence. She died 2 years before Oscar was born. She died when I was 4, and I barely have anything left of her. A couple of images, a smell I can't attach to anything specific. The fact that she existed. I don't talk about her. I don't think I've ever talked about her to Oscar. Not once. Not in passing. Not in any story I've told him about the family. There's nothing to tell that I have access to. I was 4. Oscar was not 4. Oscar was not born yet. There is no version of Oscar's life. No conversation he could have overheard. No photo album he could have found. No relative who would have brought it up to a kid who never knew her. That gets him to that name. He said it again, the same way, the same flat tone. And I stood there with my hands on his face and his arm, and I felt something close off inside me. Not panic. Panic is loud. Panic moves fast. Panic wants to do 10 things at once. This was the opposite. This was the feeling of every alternative explanation running out at the same time. All of them hitting the same wall. And the wall being the fact that Oscar could not know that name, and he had just said it twice in a cave in Missouri, while the gray on his forearm sat dry, and even all the way to his elbow. Whatever had come into him through the limestone in the second chamber, whatever he'd picked up when he pressed his palm flat against that formation and I arrived too late to stop it. It had gone somewhere inside him and found things. Things that were not his to find. Things that were not even really mine anymore. Just remnants. Just the fact of a person who used to exist. It had gone in and found her name, and it had brought it back out through Oscar's mouth, in the same voice the cave used for everything else. I tightened my grip on his arm. The skin under my fingers was warm. He was still in there somewhere. I had to believe that. I had to operate on that assumption because the alternative was something I couldn't afford to think about while I was still 60 feet underground with no clear path out. Oscar. I said it close to his face. We're leaving. Come on. Nothing changed in his expression. But when I pulled, he moved. That was something. His feet found the paved walkway, and he walked when I walked, and he didn't resist, and he didn't fall. He just came with me the way a person comes with you when they've decided not to fight it, except I don't think he decided anything. I don't think there was enough of him left in the front of his own head to decide. I kept my grip on his arm, and I kept moving, and I didn't look back at the stage curtain wall with its long, pale folds. Didn't look at whatever was or wasn't standing in the center of the chamber behind us. The path went forward. I followed it forward. Oscar moved beside me, upright and warm and breathing, saying nothing now. His eyes forward, his face empty of everything I'd spent 16 years watching develop in it. The entrance was ahead. I didn't know yet that it wasn't. I didn't know yet what was waiting between us and the way out. I was still operating on the assumption that if I moved fast enough and held on tight enough, I could get us back to the parking lot and into the car and onto I-44 and away from whatever this place was and whatever it had decided to do with my brother. I was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet, and not knowing it was the only thing keeping me moving. The path ended. That's not a way of saying it narrowed, or that I got turned around, or that I missed a turn somewhere in the dark. I mean it ended. One moment there was paved walkway under my feet, and the next there was limestone, floor to ceiling, wall to wall, smooth and pale and dry. The kind of surface that looks like it's been there since before anything alive had a word for wall. No door, no gate, no sign explaining anything. Just the cave, deciding it was done with us. I stood there for a second with Oscar's arm in my hand, and I didn't move. Couldn't, really. My brain was doing that thing it does when the information coming in doesn't match any category it knows how to file, just running it through again. Slower. Like maybe I'd misread it the first time. I hadn't misread it. The exit was gone. There was a crack in the wall, vertical, thin, running from the floor all the way up to where the ceiling started curving away. About the width of a person if they turned sideways and didn't breathe too hard. Cold air came through it, steady and even. The kind of cold that doesn't feel like air conditioning, doesn't feel like weather. Feels like something that's been underground long enough that it's forgotten what warmth is. And through that same crack, faint but absolutely clear, the audio wand was still reading names. I could hear it on the other side of the limestone, like the wall was nothing, like the wall was just a suggestion. The same flat, unhurried voice, the same pace, the same total indifference to whether anyone was listening. I pressed stop on my own wand out of reflex, just to have something to do with my hands. The voice through the wall kept going. Oscar stood next to me and breathed and said nothing. His arm in my grip felt the same as it had since the stage curtain room. Present, warm, functional. Not really his anymore. I didn't look at his forearm. I already knew what was there. I let go of him long enough to get the brochure out of my back pocket. The one I'd grabbed off the counter in the gift shop because it had a map in it, and I'd thought at the time that having a map of a cave was the kind of practical thing you do before you walk into a cave. I unfolded it. The paper was soft from being in my pocket, and the crease lines had gone white. I held it up toward the nearest light fixture and found the map. 5 chambers. That's what it showed. 5 chambers, 1 path, entrance here, exit there, everything labeled, everything accounted for. Clean little diagram. The kind of thing that makes a place feel manageable. I thought about Austin stepping out of that service corridor in the 2nd chamber. The way he'd just appeared easy and calm, with his reasonable explanation and his offer to guide us. I'd accepted it because the corridor existed and he'd come out of it, and that meant it led somewhere. I hadn't thought past that. Hadn't needed to at the time. I looked at the map again and found the service corridor. It was there. A thin line in the wall of the 2nd chamber. Not labeled, not explained. Just present in the diagram the way infrastructure tends to be. And it went somewhere. Off the edge of the printed map, past the border into the white space where the paper ended and the brochure's safety section began. 5 chambers. Whatever was at the end of that corridor was not one of them. I folded the brochure back up and put it in my pocket. Then I took Oscar's arm again. I want to be clear about something. I did not want to go back down that service corridor. I want that on record. whatever record this is. I was not curious. I was not being brave. I was standing in front of a sealed exit with a list of names playing through a crack in the wall and a brother who wasn't entirely my brother anymore. And the service corridor was the only other direction available to me. And so I went. The entrance to it was exactly where I remembered. A gap in the chamber wall, no door. Just a break in the rock that opened into a passage low enough that I had to drop my chin. The floor changed immediately. No more poured concrete path. No more little amber lights set into the baseboard. Bare limestone underfoot, slick in a way that had nothing to do with water. Just the natural surface of the rock, uneven and close. I had my phone out for the flashlight. It lit about 6 feet ahead of us and not much beyond that. The passage ran maybe 30 feet before it opened up. I smelled it before I saw it. Not a bad smell, exactly. More like the absence of something. No dust, no mineral tang, no cave smell at all. Just cold air and nothing else. The way a room smells when it's been sealed long enough that even the ordinary scents have given up. Then the passage opened and I stopped. The ceiling dropped. The space was wide but low, maybe 8 feet at the peak, and the floor was wet limestone, not standing water but damp, the kind of surface that reflects light without quite shining. No electric lighting. My phone flashlight cut across the room in a narrow beam and I moved it slowly, because I'd already registered that there were people in there, and I needed to understand what I was seeing before any of them understood I was there. 17 of them. I counted twice, moving the light carefully because I wanted to be sure I had the number right. All in Meramec Caverns uniforms. The same green and tan Austin had been wearing, the same name tag placement, the same everything. All standing, all facing inward, toward the center of the circle they'd made, their shoulders loose, their arms at their sides. The gray discoloration covered their hands and forearms to the elbow, every one of them, uniform and dry. The same color Oscar's palm had been in the second chamber before it spread. Their eyes were open, fixed on the center of the circle, all of them, the way you look at something that's holding your complete attention. I moved the flashlight beam to the center of the circle to see what they were looking at. Nothing. Bare limestone floor. Not a formation, not a light source, not a person, not a mark on the stone. Nothing. They were all looking at nothing, with the focused, patient attention of people watching something happen that I couldn't see. Nobody moved. Nobody turned. The room was completely quiet except for the sound of my own breathing, which I was doing my best to make small. I stood at the threshold and counted them, and understood what I was looking at, and then I backed up, one step at a time, keeping the light off their faces, keeping my feet quiet on the wet stone, pulling Oscar backward with me into the passage. My shoulder hit the corridor wall, and I used it to orient myself and keep going. I did not run. Running would have made noise, and noise felt like the wrong thing to introduce into that room. I backed out slow and careful, and then I was in the passage, and then I was in the chamber again, and I stopped and put my back against the wall and breathed. Oscar stood next to me, upright, breathing, eyes forward. The main exit was limestone. The service corridor was whatever that room was. I had 2 directions, and both of them were gone, which meant I was done using the map for navigation because the map had already shown me everything it was willing to show. I pulled out the brochure again, but this time I didn't look at the chamber diagram. I looked at the back panel. There was a section in small print with a green header. Safety information. I'd read it in the parking lot while Oscar was taking pictures, the way you skim something you don't expect to need. I'd noticed the part about emergency exits. I'd filed it under standard cave infrastructure and moved on. I read it again now. Slower. Emergency exit signage. Red. Posted at intervals along the main path and at the river chamber entrance. 60 feet below the surface. Red-handled call box on the river chamber wall. Pull handle to trigger surface alarm. I looked up at the path ahead of me, back toward the chambers I'd already walked through, and I thought about those red signs I'd passed on the way in, mounted to the wall at shoulder height. The kind of thing your eye slides right over, because it looks like every other piece of safety signage you've seen in every other public space your whole life. I hadn't dismissed them because they seemed unimportant. I'd dismissed them because I hadn't planned on needing them. I put the brochure back in my pocket and took Oscar's arm and started moving. The signs were red. I remember that clearly. Not the bright red of something that wants your attention, but the darker, flatter red of something that's been mounted to a wall and ignored for years. They were posted at shoulder height, spaced out along the path, and I'd walked past every single one of them on the way in without really seeing them. Your eye just slides over that kind of thing. It looks like every fire exit sign in every building you've ever been in, and your brain files it under not relevant before you've even finished looking at it. I was looking at them now. The first one was maybe 20 feet back from where I'd backed out of the service corridor. I pulled Oscar by the arm and we went that direction, away from the sealed exit, away from the corridor, moving on the only logic I had left, which was that the brochure said the river chamber was 60 feet down, and the call box was on the wall, and pulling the handle triggered a surface alarm. That was the whole plan. That was everything. Oscar walked. That's the thing I keep coming back to when I think about those minutes. He walked fine. His legs worked. His balance was normal. He didn't stumble or drag. He just didn't do anything else. No questions, no resistance, no sign that he noticed we'd changed direction. I had his right hand in my left hand, and his forearm was cold through my fingers, the same temperature as the cave air. And I didn't think about that too hard because I needed to keep moving, and thinking about it wasn't going to help. The path sloped down, not gradually. It dropped in a series of short, steep sections with metal handrails bolted into the rock, the kind of descent that makes your knees work harder than you expect. The temperature dropped with it. By the time the third red sign appeared on the wall, I could see my breath, just barely. A faint cloud that dissolved before it got far. The electric lights down here were spaced further apart, and the fixtures were older, the kind with a wire cage around the bulb. Everything smelled like cold water and something mineral underneath it. Iron, maybe. Or just the rock itself. I heard the river before I saw it. A low, constant sound, not loud, just present. Water moving over stone in the dark somewhere past the edge of the lit path. The river chamber opened up around a last bend, and it was bigger than I'd expected, the ceiling vaulting up into shadow, the walls slick and dark. The Meramec runs through the lowest level of the cave, and you can hear it even when you can't see it, which is most of the time. The path ran along a raised walkway above the riverbank, and the air down there had weight to it. Damp and cold in a way that settled into your clothes immediately. The call box was on the wall to the left of the walkway entrance. Red handle, metal housing, a small printed label above it that read, "Emergency, pull handle." I pulled it. The alarm was distant, muffled through 60 feet of limestone, coming from somewhere up on the surface, but I could hear it, a real sound, a mechanical sound. Something that functioned the way it was designed to function. It was the first thing in that cave that had done that. I stood there with my hand still on the handle, and I listened to it. And I felt something in my chest loosen, just slightly. The way a knot gives when you finally get the right end of it. I sat down on the paved walkway. My back went against the wall, and I pulled Oscar down next to me and kept his hand in mine. He sat without complaint. His eyes were open and fixed on the middle distance, not on anything in particular, just open. The gray on his forearm had stopped at the elbow, the same place it had been in the stage curtain room. I don't know if that meant anything. I didn't know what any of it meant. I just sat there and held his hand and listened to the river and waited. 12 minutes. I know because I watched the time on my phone, refreshing it every 30 seconds or so, the way you do when you're waiting for something and you can't stop yourself. The light from the screen was the brightest thing in the chamber. 12 minutes. And then there were flashlight beams bouncing down the slope and voices. 2 rangers in green jackets, both with handheld lights, both moving fast and then slowing when they saw us sitting against the wall. "You the one that pulled the box?" "Yeah," I said. They called it in and the paramedics came down about 4 minutes after that, 2 of them with a kit. And they crouched in front of Oscar, and one of them put a pen light to his eyes and said something to the other one in a low voice. Fixed and dilated. I heard that. I knew what it meant in a general way. The way you know things you've never had a reason to apply. They got Oscar onto a stretcher and carried him up the slope, and I followed behind, and nobody asked me anything yet. Outside was the hardest part, not because anything happened out there. Nothing did. It was just the light. Afternoon light, still warm, the parking lot and the gift shop and the road and all of it exactly where we'd left it. The ambulance was already there with its rear doors open. I watched them load Oscar in. I watched the doors close. I watched the ambulance pull out of the lot, and I stood there in the parking lot in my t-shirt and my worn-out sneakers, and I didn't move for a while. A sheriff's department cruiser was parked near the cave entrance. The deputy who got out of it was a big guy, 6'2" maybe, broad through the shoulders, dark brown skin and a close-cropped fade and a duty belt that looked like it weighed as much as I did. His name tag said Wilkins. He had a notepad and a pen, and he asked if I was the one who'd called it in from the call box. And I said yes, and he said he needed to take my statement. I told him everything. Not everything, everything. I didn't have words for some of it that would have come out in the right order. But I told him about Austin Santos. I told him the name tag, the uniform, the way he'd been sitting on the cave floor with his palms flat against the stone. I told him about the head, how it turned, how far it turned. I said it straight. The way you say something when you've already decided you don't care how it sounds because it happened. And there's no version of describing it that's going to make it sound reasonable, so you might as well just say what you saw. Deputy Wilkins wrote it down. He didn't look up from the notepad while I talked. When I finished, he asked me to spell Austin Santos, which I did, and he wrote that down too. Then he asked me if I had any injuries. I said no. He asked if my brother had any prior medical conditions I was aware of. I said no. He wrote that down. He didn't ask me what I thought Austin Santos was. He didn't ask me to explain the head. He just wrote down what I'd said and clicked his pen and told me someone from the department would follow up. That was it. That was the whole conversation. I sat on the hood of my car after that because I didn't know what else to do with myself. I got out Oscar's phone. I'd been carrying it since the stage curtain room. It had come out of his pocket when I'd grabbed him and I'd shoved it into mine without thinking. I unlocked it. His camera roll was open to the last photo he'd taken, the one from the entrance. The limestone arch and the Meramec Caverns sign and the figure just inside the mouth of the cave. I looked at it for a long time. The figure was Austin Santos. I was sure of it the moment I really looked. The build, the uniform, the close-cropped gray hair. He was standing just inside the arch, facing out toward the parking lot, toward whoever was about to walk in. And his head was turned. Not toward the camera, not toward the lot. Turned the way it had turned in the third chamber, past the point where a neck goes, smooth and without any sign of strain. I checked the timestamp. 40 minutes before Austin Santos had walked out of that service corridor and introduced himself as our guide. I sat on the hood of my car and I looked at the photo and I thought about the gift shop, about Jade Cox sliding those audio wands across the counter and saying, "Don't let your brother touch the formations." And I thought about Oscar standing outside with his phone up saying, "Hey, come look at this." And I thought about myself looking at it and saying it was probably staff doing a head count and handing Oscar an audio wand and walking us both inside. The warning had been right there, in Oscar's hand before we even crossed the threshold. I'd looked at it, formed an opinion, and put it down. I didn't drive anywhere. I just sat on the hood and held the phone, and the afternoon light stayed warm and the parking lot stayed exactly where it was. And none of that helped at all. The drive back was about 3 hours. I know that because I checked the time when I pulled out of the parking lot and I checked it again when I got home, and the numbers were what they were. But I couldn't tell you what happened between them. I remember the on-ramp to I-44. I remember a gas station somewhere around Rolla where I pulled off and sat in the lot for a while with the engine running and then pulled back out without going inside. The rest of it was just road and white lines and the sun moving down toward the tree line, and I drove through all of it without being present for any of it. I'd left Oscar's phone with Deputy Wilkins before I got in the car. He'd asked for it and I handed it over and watched him bag it. And I don't know why that detail stuck with me the way it did. Maybe because it was the last thing I did that felt like a decision. Everything after that was just motion. The house was the same as we'd left it that morning. That sounds like an obvious thing to say, but I remember standing in the doorway and being surprised by it anyway. Oscar's cereal bowl was still in the sink. He'd left it there before we headed out, and I told him to wash it when we got back. And now it was just sitting there with dried milk in the bottom of it, and I didn't touch it. I don't know what I thought was going to happen when I got home. I think I thought something would be different, that the house would know, or something. It didn't know anything. It was just a house with a dirty bowl in the sink and Oscar's jacket on the back of the couch and everything exactly where it had been. I sat down on the couch and I didn't turn on any lights, and after a while it got dark. The call from the sheriff's department came the next morning. Not about Oscar. That was a different call from the hospital, which I'll get to. This was a deputy, not Wilkins, a woman with a flat voice who said they were following up on my statement and needed to verify some details about the visit. Standard procedure, she said. I said okay. She asked me to confirm I had visited the Meramec Caverns with my brother, Oscar Brewer, age 16, on the previous afternoon. I confirmed it. She told me they had contacted the gift shop to corroborate the visit. I said okay. She said the gift shop clerk, and she read the name off something, Jade Cox. Had told them she remembered me coming in. She remembered the transaction. 1 adult ticket, 1 audio wand. I didn't say anything right away. I was standing in the kitchen with the phone against my ear, and I was looking at Oscar's bowl in the sink. She said I came in alone. I said. The deputy confirmed that. She said the visitor log for that day listed 1 entry. My name, 1 ticket purchased, 1 audio wand checked out. She said Oscar's name did not appear anywhere in the record. I stood there, and I thought about Jade Cox sliding those 2 wands across the glass counter. The second one landing with a small plastic click, her hand already moving back, already done with us. I thought about the receipt in my pocket, which I'd handed to Deputy Wilkins along with everything else, which was probably in an evidence bag somewhere right now, and I thought about whether it said 1 ticket or 2, and I realized I had never looked at it closely enough to know. He was there, I said. I bought 2 tickets. She warned me not to let him touch the formations. The deputy said she understood, and that they were still investigating, and that she appreciated my cooperation. She said someone would be in touch. She thanked me and hung up. I put the phone down on the counter. I stood there for a while. The thing about Jade Cox is that I keep going back and forth on what she was, whether she knew, whether the warning she gave me, "Don't let your brother touch the formations," was a genuine attempt to stop what happened, or whether it was something else. A formality, the kind of thing you say so that later, when someone asks, you can say you said it. I don't know. I'm not sure it matters, practically speaking. The outcome is the same either way. What I do know is that she looked me in the eye across that counter and told a deputy she'd never seen Oscar, and the visitor log backed her up. And whatever record the cave keeps of who goes in, it had already decided Oscar wasn't there. Or maybe it had decided Oscar was still there. I'm not sure those are different things. The hospital called that afternoon. A doctor, not a nurse, which I took as a sign before she even finished introducing herself. She said Oscar's condition was unchanged, non-responsive, pupils fixed and dilated, same as when the paramedics had noted it the day before. She used the word stable, which I think she meant as reassurance. And I think in a medical context it technically is, but it didn't feel like reassurance. It felt like a word for something that had stopped moving. She said the discoloration on his forearm had faded somewhat overnight. I asked if it was gone. She paused. She said it was reduced. She said it was still present at the edges. I told her I'd be there the next morning. She said that was fine, that someone would be available to speak with me about next steps. I said thank you, and I meant it, and I hung up. Still present at the edges. I wrote that down on the back of an envelope because I didn't want to forget the exact words. I'm not sure why I needed to remember them exactly. I think I just needed to do something with my hands. Here's what I've worked out, sitting with this for as long as I have. I don't know how much of it is right. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not anything particular that would make my conclusions more reliable than anyone else's. I'm just someone who was there. The cave didn't hide what it was. That's the part I keep coming back to. It advertised itself for 40 miles down the interstate. It had a gift shop with a woman behind the counter who told me exactly what not to do, in plain language, before I even bought the tickets. Oscar took a photo at the entrance and showed it to me, and the warning was right there, visible, already wrong in a way that should have meant something. I looked at all of it and I made decisions. Practical, reasonable decisions. The kind of decisions a person makes when they've decided in advance that nothing unusual is going to happen. I don't know what Austin Santos was. I don't know what the 17 figures in the 6th chamber were, or what they were looking at in the center of that circle, or what the names on the audio wand meant, or whose names they were. I don't know what the cave wanted with Oscar specifically, or whether Oscar was specific at all, or whether any kid who touched that formation would have done just as well. I don't know if the thing that spoke through Oscar in the stage curtain room, the thing that said our grandmother's name in that flat, patient tone, is still in him somewhere, or whether it moved on once it had what it came for. I know the gray is still at the edges of his forearm, faded but not gone. I know the call box did exactly what it was built to do. It brought the rangers and the paramedics and a deputy with a notepad. It did not bring Oscar back, because Oscar's name isn't in the log, and whatever claim the cave made on him when he pressed his palm against that limestone. And I came around the corner 30 seconds too late. That claim is still standing. The rangers can't touch it. The hospital can't touch it. The visitor log already told the story the cave wanted told. I go see him every day. He's warm. His chest moves. The machines say what they're supposed to say. The gray at the edges of his forearm doesn't change. The doctors use words like monitoring and time and hopeful, and I nod, and I thank them, and I drive home, and I wash Oscar's bowl, and I put it in the cabinet, and I sit on the couch, and I think about a 16-year-old kid grabbing a rope barrier because he was bored, because I'd let the gap between us get too wide, because I'd decided in advance that nothing unusual was going to happen. The cave didn't hide what it was. I just didn't look.